Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my review in-depth breakdown for Netflix Avatar Episode 7, The North, so N107 here. So yeah, jumping straight into it, this one I think is a very mixed bag. I think on my episode rankings, this is I think my second weakest episode of the series, and I think watching it again, I think it's pretty solidly there. There are good things about it, like I actually really like the change with Han to actually now make him a likable character versus being probably one of the most dislikable characters in the original series. It just takes away some needless, I think, romance drama from the episode, and it allows the Sokka and Yue stuff to kind of flow a little bit better and just like gives them a little bit more leeway on that side of the story, because the Sokka and Yue stuff is actually I think reasonably well done in this episode. That's not really I think where the problems are. But there are obviously cuts, changes that really do detract from the episode. Katara, of course, is the focus here. And while this ends up just by having Katara focus being a decent showing for the character, of course, it does highlight very much so how much they've held back on her as a character. That even in her big moments here, she's not really allowed to be as intense or passionate as you think the scenes kind of demand of her. And this is where you really see, I think, the mistake of making Katara more of this character who holds back her feelings rather than someone who gets those feelings out there when she, when she's annoyed or angered or anything like that. And they're obviously trying to, I guess, do some sort of an arc where maybe going forward into like season 2 and 3, maybe she will more resemble the Katara we know. But I don't think the arc to get there has been particularly great. Like, this is a moment for Katara to be absolutely incensed. And while they roughly hit the point because you still have her fight with Pakku, so much of the nuance I think is taken away from this just with how they approach doing the characterization of Katara. Pakku similarly also suffers very badly from key elements of his plot being removed, because this is where any sense of nuance with him as a character is removed. Because you don't have the whole him realizing the betrothal necklace that Katara has is the one he made for Gran basically, it takes away that big moment where Pakku realizes sort of like the errors of following the traditions, the strict traditions of the Northern Water Tribe so closely that those traditions lost him the love of his life, and maybe he should kind of evolve with the times. And that was always a big important part of his characterization that we don't quite get here. Instead, that development gets shifted into the next episode, where he sort of just in the middle of battle realizes that, hey, all the female waterbenders can actually do something, and maybe I should evolve a little bit. And it's not the same, because that big reveal about Gran is a huge moment, because it's Katara learning something about Gran, Pakku learns something, and instead the fight is meant to be the big ending of this episode, and then it just immediately transitions into the finale without really any development from Pakku at all. So it's this weird thing where borderline, like, you either needed to make much more changes or you needed to make it more like the original, and it just doesn't come across super well. Similarly, Aang finally gets to talk to Avatar Kuruk, but this feels very negative. Like, this arc that we're going for with Aang here, where it's like the Avatar has to be alone, like you can't have support from anyone, and so this results in Aang also kind of at the same time as Pakku being like, I also don't want you to fight. And it just feels like they put way too much on the Katara like arc to set up everyone's against her, and it's not needed. The issue with Pakku and even Aang supporting her in that is fine. You don't need Aang and Pakku to deny her in this episode. And especially when the result of this is kind of just like, I've made my choice, friendship effectively. Like, we don't really do anything with the Kuruk lesson because we don't really come back around to it. It just doesn't feel great. That again, a lot of the older characters trying to give advice to the younger characters does really just come across as like negativity for needless purpose. But anyway, let's get into the recap here. So we start off with this scene of G rushing in to inform Zuko, of course, that Ozai's guards are coming for him. He's going to stand trial. And he got this information because he was spying, as you can see here, on Zhao's lieutenant, Lieutenant Dang. And they, of course, think that Zhao is behind this and what's happening, which seems to be the case. So Iroh seems to figure out at this point that Zuko, like he must have figured out that you were the one who freed Aang from Pohai. They then rush to get Zuko on the boat away to safety. And we do get a nice little scene here of Zuko thanking Lieutenant G, referencing, of course, the importance of like G from the last episode, and because this is pretty much the last time we really get to see them. So that's a nice little scene, and this is cool enough because this is meant to replace the whole idea of the pirates effectively being hired to like assassinate Zuko, and this actually works, I think, reasonably well. Of like, this is Zhao's way to try and get Zuko out of the way. He's still plotting against him. The only thing that I think slightly undercuts this is just that they now have to sort of rush to build Zuko Zhao to their big kind of finale confrontation, whereas this was already in the original pre-built from episode 3, but because they chose the approach that they took, you're now having to do a lot of this later on, whereas in the original, you were already at the point where these two hate each other, and then this just took it to the next level, where you knew the next time Zuko saw Zhao, he's going for him. And of course, that makes Zuko's decision then to sort of almost try and save Zhao when the ocean spirit grabs him all the more interesting, and we'll discuss in the next episode how they approach that. It's weird. But anyway, we then get the Zuko explosion scene here. We do get the fact that, yeah, it was purposefully leaked information to get Zuko into position. They knew he'd make his escape on his own. And so, yes, blasting jelly had been planted on the boat. It explodes, and we temporarily think that Iroh, feels like, oh, has Zuko been killed here? And Zhao immediately is like, I'll console Iroh as I bring him into my plans, basically. So this is all fine. I think that's actually a nice enough adjustment to, obviously you're not including the pirates here, so you're putting Zhao more directly in the plotting thing, even though he was behind it in the original, just slightly more involved. That's fine. Then we get the arrival at the Northern Water Tribe, which the thing you have to praise this show for, I think, consistently, is that these shots arriving into these locations look stunning. They did it with like Omashu, we saw it with some of it with the air temples and stuff like that. This looks fantastic, arriving into Agna Kel-A. So we do get Aang talking to the team about Zuko. Katara just noting that, like, hey, Aang seems to have made a connection with Zuko. That's kind of cool to know from the previous episode. Just the connection being that they both have a lot on their shoulders, basically. So they arrive in the Northern Water Tribe capital, Agna Kel-A. Interestingly, Han is the one to welcome them as they, like, fly overhead. And Aang, as he sees the kind of central kind of palace up ahead, of course realizes that this is the exact location from the vision he was shown by Kyoshi in episode 2. This is where disaster is about to occur shortly in the future, so he really feels that he has to get on it about, like, informing them about this. Then we get the introduction to a lot of the Northern Water Tribe characters, of course. So we have Han, Pakku, Chief Arnook, and Princess Yue, of course. So yeah, the chief introduces everyone. We get the whole idea, our southern brothers and sisters, they introduce Pakku, of course. Aang tries to warn them, but they already know. They already have their scouts out, and they can sense, of course, that there is a fleet heading their way. So they're already preparing for war. So there's no need for Aang to kind of rush them into action. They're already basically preparing. And yeah, there's going to be a feast, and we get the immediate connection of, for some reason, Sokka feels like he has met the princess before. They don't make it super obvious just yet, but if you have somehow visually connected the idea of this hairpiece to the fox kind of tail kind of hairpiece, you obviously will make the connection immediately. They make it much clearer later on before they eventually do the reveal. But I actually think this works. Like, obviously, still have a lot of questions about why on earth Yue is a fox in the spirit world, but the dynamic being kind of somewhat interesting between them immediately on the basis of Sokka feels he has met her before, and then she knows she has met Sokka before and is sort of trying to hide it, but then is kind of like, oh yeah, that was me. It actually makes their dynamic different than the Suki Sokka dynamic, because I suppose they didn't want to just have like girl and boy meet for the first time, immediately fall for each other. So in this case, it's like, yes, Yue has the weird spirit initial interaction with Sokka, which creates a little bit of a different kind of opening to their relationship. So that's all fine. I think most of the characters look pretty good. There has been criticism over, I think, the wig or the kind of hairpiece or whatever way you want to call it for Yue. It's fine, but yes, it's not the most kind of amazing looking kind of piece of costuming out there, but it's mostly fine. But we'll get into their dynamic as we go forward in the episode. Then we get just the idea of Zhao and Iroh talking. Iroh, talking about how I think Ozai orchestrated this. He's finally kind of given up on Zuko. But Zhao has to reveal that Ozai has actually given me kind of command of an armada to conquer the Northern Water Tribe. I like that Iroh's like, why you, of all people, to do, such an honor of having this giant fleet? But Zhao points out that, like, yes, while I don't have experience in this regard, I also don't have any failure in this regard either. So we'll see how that goes, of course. But nice enough scene. Then we get into the first of, I think it's 2 Azula scenes in the episode. And so this is just Azula practicing against these kind of Bender prisoners. She succeeds, of course, but Ozai is not pleased. It's told to her that, hey, you took too many moves to defeat a Bender of this level. Not good enough. You will fight again like tomorrow, basically. And she's, of course, furious at this because she's just getting nothing from her father throughout all of this. And she goes back over to Mei and Tai Li. Obviously, she's completely in her head over this. And Mei and Tai Li can see the whole dynamic happening here, that he's just playing games with you. And she knows it, but she's also like, but I hate that he's playing games with me. Why is he playing games with me? That's the kind of focus. And she's like, no, I have to do more to prove to him that I am the one. And I kind of like this, but I also have some issues with it, like I've said before, of just, I think Azula is just, it's a little bit too manic. And I think Azula in around kind of book 1 era to just be a little bit more confident. And I get they're trying to present the idea of this is what Ozai does to like Zuko and also Azula. That because we haven't really seen Ozai and Azula interact that much, this is them trying to present this dynamic. But it feels like this close in a way to her fully coming into play in a kind of canonical sense in like her book 2 introduction. She should be a little bit closer to like the kind of perfection, confident Azula that we know, rather than having so many doubts over what's going on here. And it's just a situation of like, are they pushing the presentation of Ozai a little bit too much that it's maybe overly affecting Azula's presentation is, I think, part of the problem here. It's not like bad, it's just, have they pushed it a bit too far is probably the question that I would have. Next, we get the scene at the feast, of course, and Katara's immediately like, could you please just go over and talk to Yue? You clearly want to, you're kind of staring at her. Aang then has a bit of a conversation with Katara where he thanks her for helping him to get here. She then thanks him, similarly for saying like, you've helped me to experience the world. And it's a nice little scene of the two of them just acknowledging that they've both benefited from the team coming together, ahead of course, what Kuruk is about to say, obviously. Pakku does praise Katara when he comes over for being like self-thought. She's eager to learn more. And he talks about how the waterbenders, they have to deal with change and adapt to the flow of life. And that because she's from the south, there's not many waterbenders left. She's the last one. She has had to deal with this herself. And he's like, go to Yagoda in the morning. You will start your training there. So she's excited because, again, it hasn't been told to her yet that she's not going to be allowed to learn combat waterbending, that this is just healing. But we'll get into that, of course. So relatively nice scene here, and for the most part you've got to say that there's nothing particularly wrong with the episode up to this point. It's mostly pretty decent. Sokka then follows Yue into the kitchen. We get a few reveals with Yue here. First of all, she is a waterbender, which is interesting. And I think this is fine. Like, anyone who I think has a problem with this, I don't think understands the nature of Yue as a character and what she is. It gets explained, I think, pretty nicely later on at some point here, the idea that Yue is part spirit because of the illness that she had when she was born. And this is like canon and this version of the show as well. She literally has a piece of the spirit that allows waterbending to exist. Of course, her having that inside her kind of makes her a waterbender. I think that makes a lot of sense ultimately. Obviously, the issue that we have here is like the idea of like you expect her only to be a healer because she's a female waterbender. So you don't get a sense for like, you know, her using it maybe as much as you'd think, but seeing her here just kind of mix the dessert with her waterbending is a nice little kind of touch of a moment here. But the connection here is mainly about the idea of Sokka was worried about talking to Yue because she's a princess and expects her to be very like formal, and that there's going to be a big difference between him as just some random southerner and her as the princess. But actually, you know, based on what Katara said, she's probably just pretty normal underneath it all, and that turns out to very much be the case. She says that, you know, she plays the role that she's expected to in public of coming across as like typical royalty. But when she is alone, she does like being able to just sort of be herself. Sokka kind of connects with this and is like, yeah, I have responsibility in my tribe. I also wish that I had sort of time to, and the quote that they kind of use here is to be just a boy, in the same way that Yue can sometimes be just a girl. So in a way, they've kind of maneuvered this is part of in the original, the Sakasuki dynamic, the whole like, I'm a warrior but I'm a girl too. They've maneuvered that whole like, I'm not just a princess, I'm a girl as well kind of aspect in here with this. But it works, I think, pretty nicely to connect their two sort of like arcs together of like the two characters having this kind of depiction of themselves that they have to be based on the responsibility versus in the more casual version of themselves, and they can actually be themselves in front of each other, which speaks to their connection, which is pretty good based on the chemistry. Han kind of comes in at this point to tell Yue that she's needed, and as she leaves, this is where he makes the connection. He really looks at her headpiece and is like, oh, they show you the fox, and it's like, okay, Yue is the fox spirit, but we need to get this explained at this point. So it's a bit of an interesting reveal that's happening here. Then we get the first, I suppose, like proper Han scene, where this is in the original, but they play it up perfectly, kind of nicely in a way. Whereas in this version of the show, like Han, rather than like reluctantly getting information from someone who has more experience, Han is delighted to hear it from someone who has experience fighting firebenders and just honestly asks questions, brings Sokka over to the rest of the men to kind of relay this information. These two are like friends like immediately, and I think this connection works that little bit better of just like, hey, here is this like best warrior in the tribe that kind of everyone likes him, but he's actually kind of nice. I think is a slightly better angle than just the drama creating character that he was in the original. So I kind of like the nuance there. Then we get this interesting scene where like Aang is talking to Arnuk and Pakku, and you know, he talks about, oh yeah, I only have airbending, and it's not exactly like very offense focused as a technique. And they're like, but wait, you like did all this stuff, we've heard about your adventures, how did you accomplish that with only airbending? And he's like, yeah, well, I had my friends with me. And then we just acknowledge the idea of like, that's cool and all, but you probably should have done some training. And then we just move on. It's like, Pakku, the master waterbender, yeah, I'm not even going to attempt to train you, Aang. Even give you like a crash course on just how to bend water for the first time. Nope. We're just going to acknowledge what you've said to us and move on. And this just remains. You think there's eventually going to be a point where Aang learns waterbending, but no. They just, throughout this and the next episode, it never gets brought up, and you just have to revert back to some of the previous scenes where Aang is obviously still dealing with the fact that he's not used to having a trainer who wasn't Gyatso, and the minor setup that I guess Katara is going to be the one to teach him from the very beginning. So bit of a weird one here because, of course, it's meant to be book 1 water. And yeah, Aang never learns waterbending at all. It's such a weird decision that they made in all of this. But anyway, then we go into Katara and the start of her waterbending training, but it's actually specifically healing training, of course. So we meet Yagoda here. She's explaining waterbending healing to a class. We do actually get to see her heal a wound on a man's arm, which is kind of cool. But of course, the setup isn't really here for this with regards to like Katara being told by like Zhang in the original that like, oh wow, this ability that you just used to heal your hands is a rare ability that only a few people in the Water Tribe have. Whereas here, they just kind of seem to be going with the idea that either female waterbenders can heal, or all waterbenders can heal, and this is just what you do. I like the whole kind of cheap path dummy situation here. I'm not sure if the technique, the training technique that they show is necessarily the most amazing one to kind of highlight how it works, because obviously like the idea is that like you have water over a wound and then you kind of pulse it effectively and like channel chi to an area. I guess the idea is just that like by flowing water throughout the chi paths, you just get a general understanding for where the chi paths actually are. And so once you can activate healing over an area, you know that you're channeling it along like the chi path that goes from like here to here, rather than like here to here or something like that. So slightly odd, but obviously Yagoda's just like, oh, you're very skilled, and they pretty much immediately transition into the idea of like, okay, but what about combat waterbending training? I'm good at this, but I'd like to improve at this. And Yagoda just says like, oh yeah, we don't do that here. Women don't fight. That's their way. And Katara basically storms out without really saying anything here, which I think is fine here for her to just be a little bit more quiet, of just express like, wait, what? And just kind of walk out, just stunned that this is the case, because it's not Yagoda who is necessarily enforcing this. This is just Yagoda kind of doing her thing of like, you know, I'm the healing master. I teach people to heal. This is what I do. This is what I know. And Katara's issue, of course, is more with Pakku, who is the one who is actually standing in the way of her learning the techniques that she actually wants to learn. That's the issue, of course. But we'll get to this, of course. Then we get more Sokka and Han talking about Yue this time. So he explains that like, oh, yeah, me and Yue were betrothed, and has been that way since we've been young. But Yue broke it off when she turned 16. I never got an answer for it, but the idea is like he's fine with it. But he kind of wishes that maybe he did get an answer from her. But Sokka's just like, but you would have went through with it if like she had been okay with it. And Han's basically like, well, yeah. So just kind of a kind of more reasonable approach here versus the original, where this literally causes a fist fight between Sokka and Han, because Han is just like, yeah, of course I wanted the relationship with the princess of the tribe to get all those like perks, basically. So I think that's a good way to do it, just kind of taking away some of the drama here. Actually having Sokka and Han be friends, I think, is correct. And then we get into the Kuruk stuff. So we start off actually, and I like this, there's a bit of a setup into it. Yue shows Aang to where the Kuruk shrine is, and Aang hopes that like, oh, maybe Avatar Kuruk can help me. And Yue is like, wait, what? You're trying to get help from Kuruk? And so she kind of fills him in on the situation of just like, oh yeah, well, that could be a bit of an issue, because Avatar Kuruk wasn't a very like active avatar. Like, it's rumored that he became enamored with the spirit world and basically didn't really help out the tribe or the rest of the world. So I'm not sure how much use he will be. But Yue does say that, like, I believe there is more to his story. So, like, I'd like to know, basically, more about him. And Aang then begins to meditate. So I do like that setup of, like, Kuruk is known in the world as basically being the negligent avatar. And so Aang, in a way, is kind of like, oh, that's kind of like me. I've kind of, by not being around in the world, have not helped the world. So maybe an avatar who had a similar path can help me to a certain degree. And then we get introduced to Kuruk. And I think the look of, like, the actor who plays Kuruk it's cool. It definitely, like, embodies the character, this very imposing, powerful character. That's perfectly fine. It is just, I think the characterization here is perhaps a little bit off. And again, kind of like with Kyoshi and even a little bit with Roku at the end of when Aang talked to them, it's just a little bit overly harsh. It's a bit too negative. Like, they're meant to help the current Avatar. And their advice, I suppose, technically comes across as helping him in regards to, like, the role requires so much responsibility, be careful about, like, how your friends are involved and stuff like that. But it gets to, I think, a point where it's overly negative when there's an advocating for the idea of, like, never have a team Avatar. It's all about just the Avatar on their own, when that is never the takeaway from the series, that, you know, you should do things on your own. The whole friendship is important, team Avatar is important, is an underlying kind of theme throughout the series that you don't overly need to hit hard because it's very obvious, but they try to turn that into the big, like, you know, hype. The team friendship is a thing. So what we get here is, you know, Kuruk introduces himself. Aang wants to know, like, hey, Kyoshi showed me a vision, the water tribe is going to be destroyed. How do I stop this from coming to pass? And Kuruk is like, you can't. What you saw is going to happen. It is a vision of the future. Like, you can't avert what you saw from actually happening, but the vision didn't show you the full result. It didn't show you what way that battle turned out. You can basically decide what happens after that building falls. Like, that's the point that he's trying to make here. Look for the details surrounding the vision. Like, you don't actually know the full story here. You can still win and lead people to a victory overall. Aang immediately is then like, oh, hey, you help me to win then. Avatar Kyoshi kind of showed me the Avatar state, maybe you can help me as well. And Kuruk initially is just like, but to do that you need to master the other elements so you can control it on your own. But Aang actually wants Kuruk to, like, take over like Kyoshi did. But he says he can't, and he gets really angry at this point. He explains, and this is the stuff that relates to the novel, of course, if you've read The Shadow of Kyoshi, and you get the Kuruk backstory. He explains that in his era, as the Avatar, dark spirits threatened the world, and he had to face them all to protect the world. He spent his life fighting them, and this damaged his body and corrupted his soul/spirit, and because of this, he cannot control the Avatar state anymore, just like Aang. And he highlights that, like, this is the damage to his body, and it affects his spirit. And so I suppose it highlights that in terms of, like, the Avatar cycle, the past lives, there's a bit of a, like, weak kind of connection surrounding Kuruk because of how damaged his being basically is. I think it's a cool reason to, like, not have a connection here. It makes a lot of sense if you know the full story with Kuruk, why this is the case. Like, sure, it would be really cool to see Kuruk go full Avatar state, but it actually makes a lot of sense to not have it happen in this case. But anyway, Kuruk explains that he couldn't save the one he cared about the most from Ko, basically. So this is fully explaining the situation from before that, like, Roku talked about and he saw when he met Ko, of course. So Ko wanted vengeance basically for attacking so many spirits, and so Ko took Umi from him and took her face. So this is where Kuruk says that the Avatar must walk alone, or the ones that the Avatar loves will suffer. And this is the main takeaway from this, is that basically keep your friends at arm's length because your enemies will use them against you. That any benefit your friends will bring you is not worth, like, what they could potentially do. And obviously the intent here is that Kuruk felt that this is what he had to do in his life, that he felt, you know, without bringing some of the context in about the whole idea of he never told his friends, his team Avatar, about the whole dark spirit threats. Without some of that context, this does come across, I think, needlessly, like, negative. Whereas I think if you told Kuruk's story in a little bit more detail, this might come across as being a little bit more understandable. But to me, because of how blunt it is, I was fully expecting them to come back around to this and have Aang have a little bit of a character arc with Kuruk, where he comes back to Kuruk and is like, no, I think you're wrong, I need my friends. But as we'll see, they just have a scene where they come back to this and double down on Kuruk's statement. And I really wanted Aang to come back to Kuruk and kind of convince him, you know, to see sense in this, and in a way some of the other avatars as well, but they don't quite do it. So again, a kind of mixed bag in terms of, like, love that they're bringing up the Kuruk stuff, love that they're bringing the novel stuff in, but was the presentation, the execution perfect? I don't really think so, because ultimately the arc, Aang, what he took from this, doesn't help the episode at all in my mind, of just like Aang temporarily feeling like he has to do this all on his own, and it's just a bit of a messy arc in my mind. And then we build up to the big kind of romance scene between Sokka and Yue. So when he speaks to her again, he's really awkward and doesn't really know what to say. So he just leaves. And then Yue is like, oh, are you going to recombobulate? And then Sokka's like, it's the spirit. And so yes, Yue is the fox spirit. She explains her backstory here about the whole idea of like when she was born, she was sick. Her father pleaded with the spirits to save her. The moon spirit gave her some of its essence. So she is part spirit. So basically she's kind of sort of like the Avatar, as having like a separate spirit inside of her. So she also is a bridge. This is why she chose to become basically like a spirit priestess and help people become spiritual in the tribe. And this also means that she can visit the spirit world in her dreams, which seems to be the explanation they use for why she has some sort of a fox form, is that I guess when you visit the spirit world through your dreams, you just have a different form. Would like a bit of explanation on that, but anyway. So what we get from this is Sokka being very surprised at this, because Yue talks about the spirit world and going there as if it's fun, but he talks about his own like dramatic experiences in the spirit world and mentions having to, of course, experience a painful memory, which Yue wants to know about, but he tries to play it off of like, nah, it doesn't mean anything, but she's like, no, don't make it kind of less than what it is. Tell me about it. So he talks about the situation, of course, like overhearing his father say that, like, I don't think he's good enough to be a warrior, basically, like not having that faith in him. And so Yue says that when she met him in the spirit world, he was worried about his friends. She saw that his heart is what sets him apart from others, and that's what makes him a warrior. And that now, if his father could see him now, he would like agree that he is a warrior and would be kind of very proud of him. So it's a nice scene between the two. He then asks, I suppose, the equivalent question to her of just like, hey, what happened with Han? Of like, he seems like ideal. Why did you turn him down? So she explains that, yes, he is ideal, but he is not the boy of her dreams, as she kisses Sokka, of course, highlighting that the idea of Sokka literally is the boy she met in her dreams in the spirit world. And there's a nice little connection there of like, that's actually like quite a well written line to build up to this. And again, given that like in all versions of Avatar, the movie, the original, Sokka Yue has to be developed quite quickly. I think they all do it pretty well overall, so this is a pretty consistently well done kind of relationship in all the different ways we've seen it done. Because even in the movie where Sokka gets like basically no screen time, the minute or two that we get with Sokka and Yue is actually pretty good, and some of Sokka's best stuff in the movie, if you've ever seen the movie, obviously. Then we go back to Aang and Kuruk. So Aang argues that like, hey, it was only with my friends that I actually managed to get this far. What about Team Avatar? He actually says Team Avatar. But Kuruk literally says the line, there is no Team Avatar, only the Avatar. And I'm just like, no, come on. No Avatar would dismiss the power, the importance of Team Avatar. I get Kuruk as a character and the whole idea of he felt he had to do things alone, and the whole idea of he is the Avatar who took this burden on himself and basically kept it from everyone, destroyed his own reputation to effectively save the reputation of like Yang Chen and so many other people. But you expect, I think, a past Avatar to be just a little bit better in their reflection on their own stuff, in terms of like realizing that this was kind of part of the mistake perhaps as well. Again, it's not wrong, I think, the presentation of Kuruk, but if you've seen the scenes with Kuruk, he's a little bit more reasonable than this version of Kuruk is in the original. So, and then the main takeaway is just like, I don't like the idea of any Avatar suggesting that the Avatar tried to do everything on their own, regardless of what the background behind that is. It's a very, to me, forced kind of plot element here as we get into the kind of crux of the episode and these kind of final few scenes. So we finally get the confrontation with Pakku. She asked, where will I be stationed during the battle? And he's just like, oh, I thought you knew that women weren't allowed to fight. And she didn't, and she wouldn't have accepted it if she knew. It's not up for debate. And he does say, he literally says the line, like, you are not strong enough. Women are not strong enough. And I think the problem throughout this is that this is about the most upset that we get to see Katara. It's just a little bit of an annoyed face and, you know, slightly heightened emotions, but she never allows herself to just, you know, go all out of like, this should be the biggest insult ever presented to her. This should be the moment where effectively I would say borderline the fight should start right here. He should turn around and walk off. She water whips him. This kind of in a way should be where the fight pretty much starts to a certain degree. But no, it's just like she doesn't say anything more and he just leaves. Of like, you just say like, I won't let what happened in the south happen here, because he's kind of worried that like, well, all the waterbenders of the south got wiped out. I won't let something similar happen here. And it's like, is that how you're trying to sort of like save the character from saying this? The idea of like, don't get involved in the battle so you'll survive it. Okay. Then we get like double piling it on Katara here. Katara vents to Aang about not being able to fight. But Aang, after seeing Kuruk, is just like, yeah, I agree you shouldn't get fighting. You know, people will get hurt, and I can't let that happen to you. And he says that, you know, you being there, you know, just being around me will mean that I can't be kind of at my best. I will hold back if you are around because I'll be worried about you getting hurt. And so Aang is like, I'm basically in agreement. You shouldn't be involved in the battle. And again, Katara is too stunned to speak. Again, you feel she should speak out against this to Pakku and to Aang in this version, but she doesn't. And it's just like, why are you doing it this way? Because the scene where you try and turn it around is not as strong as you think it is. And that's the big problem with this. Then we get Zhao talking about how much of a legend he's going to become when he succeeds at the North. Iroh, of course, highlights all the challenges that they faced in the past when it comes to attacking the North. Zhao feels that destiny is on his side. Again, warning about the waterbenders, but Zhao has made arrangements to assure his victory. And he brings up the box, as you can see here, which of course, as we later learn, has Kuruk's dagger in it. Not that it really gets explained, but I think we obviously know the whole idea here. Again, needlessly changed plot point into this overly convoluted thing with a dagger. No idea what they were thinking with this one, because Zhao's arc is needlessly changed for no obvious reason, and it doesn't help things, certainly. Then we get the reveal that, hey, Zuko's actually alive. He's undercover on the ship. There's a fun scene here of like, do you have a plan? And he talks about, of course there's a plan. So no plan then. And of course, that's the whole idea. There's a little bit of an interesting scene here where like Iroh's like, this is not like Zhao. I think someone else is masterminding this behind the scenes. And this is where we get the transition into Azula. So here's the lightning generation scene, which I get what they're going for, but also I think this is a deeply confusing scene. And it's just like, you had no plan here, did you? These scenes amount to very little. So Azula's asked to choose her next opponent. She refuses. She stands up to Ozai. He firebends at her as she goes to walk away, and she just turns around and just performs lightning generation. And obviously this impresses Ozai, and she's just like, enough of these games, set me loose on the world, I'm ready. And the idea is, of course, that Ozai, I guess, thinks that she's ready. And my problem that I have here is, like, he was doing this to try and force her to be at her best. And obviously I'm guessing this is his first time seeing her bend lightning. But nothing about the scenes that we've seen before this have suggested that Azula is actually learning lightning. She just does it here, and it's like, was this just a secret technique that you didn't want to show off, but feel that you have to show off? Which goes against, I think, some of the characterization, where like Ozai's actually getting to her. You'd think she would just be very open and honest with the extent of her abilities. And it just feels like the blue fire reveal, the lightning reveal here, they feel that these are mega moments, but the scenes that they're in are nothing. Where, like, I don't mind the idea that Ozai seeing her perform lightning is the proving moment, but no one says anything about it. It's just like, this unique ability, I guess you're good now, so I'm going to use you. And then it's like, why what was the whole idea here of like, I'm done playing games, proving myself to you, so I'll prove myself to you. Like that's the problem with this scene, is like, okay, I'll prove myself to you by not by attacking these people, but by just performing this technique that I could have shown you before. Like there's some underlying logic to this that is just missing, because they're trying to hype up lightning without actually telling you what lightning is, because I'm guessing they still want to have the reveal about the explanation for this in the later seasons, but they still want to use it here. And it's the idea of they want to have their cake and eat it too, and that doesn't work. So while cool in some aspects, this is also like messy. And again, Mei and Ty Lee, this is basically, I think, the last time we really get to see them is in this scene, and they still haven't named them. Their importance in this is very, very minimal. Was it worth it to do all of this stuff? Some of the scenes are good, but some of them aren't, and that's the problem with Azula. Very mixed over the course of the whole series. Next up, we have Sokka talking to Katara, and she, of course, is like, I'm going to fight Pakku. And this is kind of at least decent in that she actually says it, being like, I won't hold myself back anymore. Highlighting that, of course, she as a character, I guess, has held herself back for all this time. And that is in line with the presentation of this version of Katara, but I think pretty universally across the fandom, I've seen a lot of criticism of why did they do this to the character. It doesn't benefit her, really, because the shift out of this is not good. It's not clear. So Sokka says that Katara was right, that they did need to help Aang and to save the world, and so yeah, he supports her in this. He wants her to take Pakku down. She thinks he's going to like talk her out of it, but actually no, he's full on board with this. So then we get the kind of final sequence here, which is the fight with Pakku. Aang arrives to see this fight about to happen, and he kind of wants to step in and stop it. Sokka does stop it, and yeah, she throws the water at him, forcing him to fight. And, it's basically like the show, but I don't think this fight is anywhere near as well done as the original is. They try to be accurate in a lot of scenes, but the slight clunkiness of the way they do the dynamic fight scenes in this version of the show very much takes away from it. Whereas this is actually one of the more impressive animated fights in the original series, in terms of just, it's two waterbenders throwing everything at each other, it feels like, whereas this does feel a little awkward. There's some moments that are very good, but some of them it's just like, yeah, the effects don't quite come together to bring this scene together. It's fine, but it's not the best action scene in the show, obviously. But the idea is eventually she is trapped by Pakku's ice. One point I would point out is that I wasn't sure how I felt about Pakku does the kind of like snowstorm kind of blowing icy wind at her, and the problem I had with this is that this is the move that like undoes her hair, and I'm like, that came across as more airbending than waterbending, what you just did there. Like, I understand that like sometimes the elements can like inadvertently create the effect of like another element happening, that sort of type thing, but this very much felt like Pakku borderline just did some like airbending here, because he created like a wind enough to undo Katara's hair, and it wasn't inherently clear that it was just the bits of like snow that he was sending at her that did it. So I don't know, I think the presentation on that could have been like slightly better. Like, I get that there is the technique that people have where you blow out as a waterbender, but you use this to sort of freeze something, but this was kind of enhanced, like the amount of kind of wind that he ended up creating. But yeah, he still won't let her fight, and he just walks off. Like, this is where it's highlighted like that. Okay, so no arc for Pakku in the episode, like that's basically the waterbending master. Okay, but you do get him looking back as the other waterbending students immediately flock around Katara, because they've just seen like a female waterbender put on a great show against the master, and they've seen her do moves that they've never seen before, especially the ice disc maneuver, of course. So this is where she gets her quote-unquote victory out of this, is that the takeaway is not that, oh, Pakku has proven Katara wrong. It's that actually most of the people are more impressed with Katara than anything that Pakku did in the fight. But the problem is that Pakku doesn't seem to fully take this on board, because they don't do the betrothal necklace scene for whatever reason. Because it's cool reveal about Gran and Pakku together. Katara learns something from it. Maybe because you weren't doing the Yue drama surrounding this in the rest of the episode, it maybe slightly changes it, but it still works just with like Katara, Gran and Pakku as the like main characters involved in this. But in the aftermath of this, Katara's just like, yeah, look, it's my decision to fight. Sokka agrees that he also chooses to fight. They're in this together, and it's basically just that, yeah, we will do this together. The black snow falls, the fight is on, and we set up the final episode. The wrap up here, again, lightning quick, pretty basic, of just like, yeah, Kuruk was wrong, you know, I can have my own opinion on this, but my friends have decided on their own that they're going to do this. And they just kind of point out that, like, you know, you want to protect us, but there's no situation where you can guarantee protecting us. We made our own decision to put ourselves in danger. Like, we can protect each other just like we can protect you. You can protect us. Just the basic ideas. And it's like, okay, that's fine, but the nuance of a lot of the arcs is just lost by the end of this. Like, you just come out of this, and unfortunately it feels like it's mark missed in a lot of situations. And by the end, you kind of feel that, okay, the Zuko infiltration arc was pretty well done with the explosion, that side of things. That's pretty nice. Zhao's scheming. Okay, good. I think the Sokka and Yue stuff is good. I think the change with Han is good. Pakku, I think is kind of a bit of a disaster what they do here. Katara's arc is functional, but not great. And then Aang's arc, I just think, is just like, no, there's nothing here, unfortunately. Like, this arc, again, just this slightly different angle on responsibility of the Avatar is just, you know, you're hitting it over the head too much. Do something different. And that's the thing. Aang supporting Katara, this being an episode about learning waterbending, would have made this episode so much more interesting, because you would have at least had Aang kind of learn some waterbending stuff, and him supporting Katara would have been a much more interesting dynamic than anything that they attempt to do here with, like, oh, no, Team Avatar, it's the Avatar. That's not a great thing to present in Avatar as a point. So, yeah, I think coming out of this, I feel pretty strongly that, yeah, like, this is one of the weaker episodes. Even though it's, like, accurate in the sense that, like, it's 118 in the position that it needs to be in, they've taken enough out of 118 that for an episode that is effectively just the adaptation of one episode, like, slightly expanded with some lore from Kuruk and stuff like that, it's crazy how much is missing here. That this is like double the length of an animated episode, but it's missing so many pieces from a 22-minute animated episode. It's kind of crazy how they managed to construct it in this way and achieve relatively little. Because there's only like 2 Azula scenes in here. There's only really 2 Kuruk scenes. Like, it's weird how much the time doesn't kind of get used effectively here. So yeah, one more in-depth episode review to go, and I'll probably do like 1 or 2 other videos just wrapping some stuff up. Like, I think I'll make a shorter video so it's not just in live stream about my thoughts on how they should do book 2 in terms of how they should do the adaptation. And then maybe some final thoughts as a video just to cover some general ideas. But we'll see how it goes. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on episode 7 of Netflix Avatar. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.